An ultimatum for the Israeli Prime Minister. War Cabinet member Benny Gantz threatens to quit the unity government if Benjamin Netanyahu fails to present a post-war plan for Gaza by June the 8th. What could this mean for the war and for Netanyahu's political future? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. A new crisis for Benjamin Netanyahu at a time when public anger against his handling of the war on Gaza is rising with each passing week. Senior Minister Benny Gantz is threatening to quit Israel's coalition government if Netanyahu doesn't come up with a plan for the Strip's post-war governance within 3 weeks. Gantz has tabled his own goals, which include an international coalition to administer Gaza's civil affairs, and that has put Netanyahu in a tough spot. Accepting the suggestions put forward by Gantz could cost Netanyahu the support of far-right coalition partners and therefore topple his government. So, how will the deepening divisions in the war cabinet affect his coalition? And what could they mean for the future of Israel's war on Gaza, which has already killed more than 35,000 Palestinians? We'll discuss these questions with our panel in just a moment. First, though, this report by Ibtisam Genfood.
What does a post-war Gaza look like? That's the question dividing Israel's war cabinet, while fighter jets, tanks and ground troops intensify their assault on the Strip. Senior Minister and War Cabinet member Benny Gantz has issued an ultimatum.
If we are to continue to fight side by side, the Cabinet must, by June the 8th, approve an action plan that will lead to the realization of 6 strategic goals. Bring back the hostages, topple the rule of Hamas, and ensure Israeli security control over the Gaza Strip.
A retired general and longtime political rival of Benjamin Netanyahu, Gantz has threatened to withdraw his centrist party from the emergency unity government unless the prime minister presents a plan for Gaza's future governance.
Establish an American, European, Arab and Palestinian administration that will manage the Strip and lay the foundation for an alternative authority that is not Hamas and is not Mahmoud Abbas.
It echoes the government's intention to exclude both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority from power in Gaza after the war. The Prime Minister rejected the plan, saying it would amount to Israel's defeat and the establishment of a Palestinian state, a reluctance some analysts say has little to do with the proposal itself.
Because there is not a lot of a difference between him and Netanyahu, if indeed we go for elections, it's going to be less on the intricacies of the strategic agenda and more on the question of who is the leader that Israel needs. It's a political game, much more than a strategic competition.
The opposition has long blamed internal discord on Netanyahu's concessions to his far-right coalition partners, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, whose support is seen as vital to his political survival. The government is also under increasing public pressure. Tens of thousands of protesters gathered in Tel Aviv on Saturday, as they have done every week for months, calling for the safe return of the captives and early elections. With more than 100 captives still held in Gaza and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians displaced yet again, doubts are growing about the military strategy, more than 7 months into this war. And with troops facing fierce resistance in Jabalia, an area Israel previously said had been cleared of Palestinian fighters, Netanyahu's stated goal, the total elimination of Hamas, seems far from being achieved. Ibtisam Genfood, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Okay, let's go to our guests now. In Tel Aviv, Udi Goren is the cousin of an Israeli whose remains are being held by Palestinian fighters in Gaza. Udi is also a filmmaker and photographer. From London, we are joined by Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Program at the UK think tank Chatham House. And also in Tel Aviv is Alon Liel, a former Israeli diplomat. Thank you, all of you gentlemen, for joining us on the program. Udi, I want to start with you. You want what Benny Gantz wants, at least in part, right? Which is return the captives who are currently being held in Gaza, return them to Israel, whether they are alive, whether they are dead. That includes the remains of your cousin who was killed on October the 7th. So how do you feel about Gantz's ultimatum to Netanyahu?
I think that it should have been done a long time ago. And to be accurate, I think in order to really understand what the families are going through, it's not the remains of my cousin. It's actually the body of my cousin that has not been properly buried. And in Israeli society and Jewish culture, there is a great significance to this closure. And it's not just us. I think for most people in the world, it's not just skin and bones that are being held hostage in Gaza. And I think that this closure is something that, if it would not be done, would be a bleeding wound in Israeli society for ages to come, for generations to come. So I think that Gantz should have made this statement a long, long time ago, because we have been in stagnation for far too long. There haven't been an achievements neither in the war front nor on the hostage deal front. And he is a part of it. He joined this government in order to influence from within. And so far, we have been 5 months with absolutely no movement on the hostage front and no real achievements on, the bringing down Hamas goal. So they need to just take leadership. And I hope that what he's done last night is a major step in that direction.
Well, we're going to try and understand exactly what it is that he did with this ultimatum and break down the politics of this. Alon, let me come to you. Netanyahu has ignored the U.S. president. He has ignored wave after wave of Israeli protesters. What's to say he's not just going to ignore Benny Gantz?
No, I think the main 2 points of difference between Gantz and Netanyahu now are, first, Gantz wants a discussion, a public discussion, not only Israeli, regional, international, into the issue of the day after. And Netanyahu said, there is no point to discuss the day after when I don't know what's happening today. Let's first see how this war ends and then discuss the day after. This is a big, big issue. This involves also a secondary issue of, inside this day after discussion, what is the Palestinian role, future role in Gaza? Netanyahu, of course, doesn't want to touch the issue, and he is being accused for preparing a full Israeli military control on the Gaza Strip. So I think this is where the difference lies, especially. And as you know, Gantz cannot topple the Netanyahu government, so the deadline can simply pass and Netanyahu can ignore it, and Gantz will leave, and we are back to the same point.
Okay, well, slow down there, because I think that's something I really want to lay out for our viewers. You say, as I know, Gantz cannot bring down the Netanyahu government. I do have a few questions about that. I want to probe this a little further. We're going to talk about day after and big picture. We'll do that in a moment. First, I want to talk about the politics and the mechanics of it. Yossi, if Gantz does indeed execute his threat to quit the unity government, what happens?
Well, if he doesn't leave, he loses any credibility, because he sets these 6 criteria. I think we need to pay attention actually to one that the international community has less interest, but actually can bring down the government, which is the issue of mobilizing ultra-Orthodox into the military. But if he leaves, the coalition still have stable 64 support of member of Knesset. You need 61 for a majority in the Israeli Knesset. It has 64 together with the far right. So in a way, it consolidates the coalition, because there are less differences between between the far right and what Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot represent, though I will still argue that there is a paper-thin difference between what Netanyahu says and what Gantz is saying. But in principle, this government can continue. I think we also need to pay attention to.
Pause for a second. I want to highlight. I just want to highlight just a second. I want to highlight the math that you brought up there, which is that without Gantz's National Unity Party, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has what he had before October 7th, before the war, he still has a majority of seats in parliament. You mentioned 64. 120 seats in the Knesset. He has 64 members of his coalition, and that's enough to stay in power. So you're saying if Gantz takes his 12 seats, changes nothing. Is that what you're saying?
I would argue unless there was few brave other members of Knesset, either from Likud, and that's why I mentioned Gallant that already challenged directly Netanyahu last week, or others within his own cabinet or the coalition, or the ultra-Orthodox to say enough is enough. Israel is embroiled in a never-ending war and in front of the ICJ and, embroiled with ICC maybe issuing arrest warrant, and then we need to go and ask the people actually what they want after these horrible 7 months. It's a possibility, it's a real possibility that this government will continue. This coalition will govern for a while further.
Okay, let me take that to Udi then. Udi, you heard Alon and Yossi explain, regardless of this threat, the likelihood is that Benny Gantz cannot bring down this government, even if he withdraws his support for it, even if he quits the unity government. So you were telling us a moment ago, I wish this had been done sooner. But the question is, what's the point? If it doesn't alter the policies of this government, and if it doesn't bring down the government, then what's it for?
Well, luckily or unluckily, politics is not just a math game. So right now, within Israeli society, the fact that they are a part of this government gives it credibility. Because if you look at the polls within the Israeli public, most people, about 70% of people, that's a recent poll I've seen, think that Netanyahu is motivated by his own political interests as not by the interest of the general good of Israel. And therefore, once they are not there, this will be somewhat of a cue for the Israeli public to say, all right, this government has completely lost credibility. There is no one within it that you actually trust. And this means to the public out in the streets, this means out to us, the hostage families, that we also have high hopes with believing that they are there, Gantz and Eisenkot are there in order to make sure that the hostage deal is struck. And once they are not there, the credibility of this government will completely be lost. And in light of what Yossi has just mentioned, the major issue of drafting the ultra-Orthodox into the military, that's something that might be a major issue for the government. So might
Udi, I want to make sure I get this right. Are you saying, okay, the electoral math doesn't immediately change if Gantz leaves the unity government. However, that could turbocharge protests against the government and dissent against the government within Israeli society, and that could change the political landscape. Is that what you're saying?
It's more than that. It's more than that because Yossi has mentioned Gallant, the Minister of Defense, that has bluntly spoke against Netanyahu. The chief of staff is speaking against the fact that this war does not have an end game and it puts soldiers at risk. And this is a far larger issue than just the hostages or just the political game of whether or not this government will be toppled by them leaving. Because as long as a war is a means to an end. And as long as there is no end, and this is a voice that's now being heard more and more, including by the top people, the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff, who say out loud, if you don't have a discussion about the day after, if you don't have an end game in mind, then we are fighting for nothing, then soldiers are dying for nothing. And this for me, as a cousin of a hostage, that aligns with exactly the same goal that I am asking. Because as long as there is no solution, my cousin will not be brought back to burial in Israel. So these interests are aligned with our interests, the hostage families. We want a plan. We want to know how this government is not just fighting endlessly. Soldiers are dying, hostages are dying. The country is in a dire position at this point, internationally, economically, politically. We want to have a plan. The nation of Israel, the people of Israel, want a plan.
Okay, so you're raising the same issue that was the first thing that Alon said, which is the day after, right? That's the huge question here. I want to just lay out for our viewers the 6 strategic goals that Gantz says he wants Netanyahu to address before June the 8th. So, 6 goals. One is return the hostages. That's the first thing, that have a plan to how to return the Israeli captives who are currently in Gaza, whether they are dead or alive. That was number 1. Number 2 was create an international coalition with Europeans, Americans, Arab countries, and Palestinians to manage civilian affairs in Gaza. Number 3 was overthrow Hamas rule and demilitarize Gaza to ensure Israeli control of the Gaza Strip. Number 4, he wanted a plan from Netanyahu on returning Israelis who have been displaced, specifically in northern Israel, displaced by cross-border fighting with Hezbollah. Number 5 was promote the normalization of ties with Saudi Arabia, which we know Israel is something Israel covets. And number 6 was adopt, two of you have mentioned this, adopt an outline for military service for all Israelis. You mentioned the Haredi draft, so the ultra-Orthodox, who currently, many of whom are exempt from military service. There are many within Israeli society who feel that they should share the burden for taking part in combat and joining the military. So those are the 6 points of the plan. Alon, is there anything in this plan that Benjamin Netanyahu can engage with to say to Benny Gantz, here you are, here's my vision?
Yes, I think it all depends on Netanyahu and on the coalition that he wants for himself after June 8th. He knows that if Gantz will lead, he's more dependent on the extreme right, and he will have to satisfy the demands of the extreme right regarding full entry to Rafah and so on, and probably complicate Israel's foreign relations. But I think he might be willing to do so, because the thing that he can please Gantz with is not returning the people to the north, because they will not go there as long as we have rockets. The only thing that he can really satisfy Gantz with is that he creates an international table of Europeans, UN, United States, Egypt, hopefully other Arab countries, Israel, to discuss the day after.
But this sounds like a wish list, Alon, rather than a plan, even coming from Gantz. This sounds like neither the Europeans nor the Americans nor any of the Arab countries in the region have said that they have any appetite for this kind of, for being involved in administering the Gaza Strip.
We are not at the stage of who enters. We are at the stage of who comes to the brainstorming. He can come and tell Gantz, I promise you, I will create a serious brainstorming involving the Israeli public, the region, and so on, and this will keep Gantz in. I think it's a relatively easy thing to do, but we see that Netanyahu is afraid of it. He's afraid of it because he thinks that most of the people who will sit around the table will like to have Fatah there, or the PA, the Palestinian Authority, as a player. For him, it's a red line, and he can gain time by doing so. He can still reject this wish of many people around the table, but I think Gantz will be happy by the mere fact that such a discussion will start.
Yossi, isn't this discussion on the day after and finding who might help administer Gaza and whether it would be Hamas, whether it would be Palestinian Authority, bearing in mind that the major players here want neither, isn't all of this kind of tinkering around the edges with the really big question being a sort of longer term vision? Does Israel see a place for a Palestinian state, yes or no? Benjamin Netanyahu has said no. The extreme right in his government has said no. But until you move in that direction, what they're talking about with these coalitions of Europeans and Arabs, it sounds like it doesn't sound super realistic at this point in time.
You're absolutely correct. The wish list is a wish list. Look, even the issue of advancing normalization with Saudi Arabia. This is a prize for Israel. Why should Riyadh end this prize for Israel when they exclude not only Hamas, which can be understandable, but they exclude the PA and the PLO from running Gaza, talking about military control, basically, of Gaza, and no mention in any shape or form of a peace process, let alone a peace agreement based on a two-state solution. If you ask Saudi Arabia, they also go back to the peace agreement and the Beirut proposal and the Beirut Declaration of 2002, which first a Palestinian two-state solution, which entails a Palestinian state, and then they can discuss normalization with the rest of the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia. There is nothing for either the Americans, the European, the region that attract them to this kind of wish list, knowing that the next stage will be another round of violence, reconstructing of Gaza, and then in a matter of few years, another round of violence, because no one deals with the root causes of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is establishing, well, one state exists already, but also establishing a Palestinian state.
Udi, I wonder, you go to the protests, I assume most Saturday evenings, the hostage families protests in Tel Aviv. Is there a discussion within that community about these really big, longer-term issues, Palestinian statehood, et cetera? And is anybody connecting those dots? Your immediate concern of returning hostages and the long-term big picture of what to do with two peoples on one land.
Of course there is, because I think most of the families now understand that these are all tied. Of the 6 points that Gantz has made, and you detailed, 5 of them, including the hostages, including the people going back to northern Israel, they all have to do with the discussion of the day after. It all has to do with getting into a deal and finding a resolution to this conflict. And it doesn't have to be right now. We've mentioned, the word peace, and we've mentioned long-term solutions, which I'm sure many Israelis would love to hear about. But even if we speak short-term, and you've mentioned that nobody is willing to touch this topic, especially the Saudis, who've expressed interest, in being the patrons of this part of the land, but they will not come here if they think that next year, whatever money they put in would be bombarded from the air. And I can totally understand this. So as long as we don't speak about the day after and a solution to this conflict, I will not see my cousin. This is as clear as day. And I think that most families understand this. However, and that's a big however, we as the hostage families only care about one thing, and that is getting our loved ones back. How is this achieved? What should they strive for? What's going to be written in this agreement? That's out of our mandate. But we do understand that unless this is being spoken about, our loved ones will not be back. This is all tied. All of these topics are tied together.
Do you have specific demands, the hostage families? I mean, do they have specific demands relative to the Rafah operation that is happening right now? Israel has pushed out 600,000 to 700,000 Palestinians out of Rafah in southern Gaza. The argument of the Netanyahu government is this military pressure is what's going to get the hostages back. What are the hostages' families saying about that? Because that's the here and now.
We, at this point, are actually saying that this is not true. Once the Rafah military operation will be over, we'll be in the exact same place we were, and we would still have to strike a deal. We would still have to negotiate with Hamas. We would still have to pay for the enormous negligence and the disaster of October 7th. And this would put us, the hostage families, at the exact same place, only that the Rafah operation poses a significant threat, not only to the lives of the soldiers fighting there, but also to the lives of the hostages that are being held there. So we fully understand that it will not make any significant change in the upcoming negotiations following Rafah.
Okay. Alon, we don't have a lot of time left on this show. What are the next moves that our viewers should be looking out for? The ball is in Netanyahu's court to a large extent. Gantz has issued an ultimatum. Netanyahu has already started to say we're not interested because that would be the defeat of Hamas. Still, though, he's got 3 weeks and he's got the June 8th deadline. What are you looking out for?
I think the key issue now is the international involvement, especially on the issue of recognition of Palestine. What the 7th of October and the war after did is that less people in Israel are willing to agree to a Palestinian state now. The issue of two states regarding the Israeli public has been shoved away. But internationally, the world is dealing with the issue much more than before the war. And the war has to explain the Israeli leadership and the Israeli public that they are not going to forget about the issue of a Palestinian state. And this week, probably 3 countries in Europe are going to recognize Palestine. This can affect the discussion inside Israel and help Gantz, because this will help him say we must involve the world. The world will not give up, and we cannot solve the problem alone.
Okay, and that'll be the last word for today. I want to thank all our guests for their time, their perspective today. Udi Goren, Yossi Meckelberg, and Alon Liel. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.